Don't be fragile with Agile. That's the name of this short video. It's a dystopian story, which I'm sort of renaming a dystopian story because I'm a performance engineer or a performance tester. And I thought you might like that. I thought it's funny. Well, I think it's funny. And it's not meant to be serious. It's meant to be like a thought experiment, which is merging the idea of dystopian stories, which are really warning stories about the future and what could come if we don't heed the warning signs now. And I'm going to do this in the context of software development and the Agile software development methodology. And I'm also going to map that back to Animal Farm because I think Animal Farm's fun. So Animal Farm was the first dystopian story that I enjoyed as a child, and I really did enjoy it. I enjoyed it for the farm animals. And it took me quite a while to actually realize that there's much more to it than the politics of a farm. It's much deeper, and I'm sure there's a whole lot of levels that I'm not aware of yet, but I'll get there eventually if I keep on persisting, I'm sure. In this video, I'm going to go through things around the Agile Software Development Manifesto and the origins and the workings of Animal Farm. Hopefully to bring you some enlightenment and a bit of a warning on where I see a problem with testing and QA in general in the context of organizations that are embracing Agile. I think Agile is great, but I think that there's some risks that are hidden in the Agile process, and I just like to to highlight that. So I love disruption. Now, disruption is really important and it's necessary for advancement of IT, advancement of business, advancement of biology, or any other realm. Effective disruption comes, though, when a great new idea happens and it's embraced and people follow it and take it up. You didn't have to convince people it was a good idea to have electricity and have a light bulb. No one forced people to have a light in their house. The idea of being able to turn a light on and be able to read after dark without being limited to candles or a lantern or whatever was fantastic. So they didn't have the light police that made everyone turn their lights on at night. Whereas when we have an ideology that forces something on us, that's different. That's a different type of disruption. And in Animal Farm, you see that type of disruption. Now, there's many aspects of Agile that are not like that. There are a lot of good ideas. I love a lot of the great ideas. And I embrace them and follow them and would do them even if I'm not asked to. But there are some situations where that line is a bit more blurred. So basically, I like disruption when everyone wants to do this new thing, even if it messes up the business model of the incumbents. But I don't like it when it's mandated. So I've been working in IT for more than 30 years. I started out in the traditional plan and document, that waterfall style software development methodology. And I've seen many revolutionary ideas come and go. So I hope you enjoy this reflective dystopian sort of presentation of ideas in relation to software development and testing. So Animal Farm is a story about the Russian Revolution, but it's difficult to think about the Russian Revolution without thinking of the Communist Manifesto. And whenever I think of Agile, I think of the Agile Software Development Manifesto. I know they're different manifestos, but the word manifesto is sort of not a word I use every day, and that's two of the times where I've heard of it. So I tend to link them for that obscure reason. But as in all revolutions, the Agile revolution, if we can call it that, did bring about sweeping changes and did bring about a massive improvement to the software development process through that manifesto of Agile software development. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to talk about the storyline of Animal Farm on the one hand, this hand, and the story of software development and an organizational sort of context on this hand. And I'll put some text up in the appropriate spots on the screen. So the old characters in Animal Farm were the farmers and the animals, obviously. But in an organizational context now, we have management and we have software developers, architects, and testers. The setting of the story was the farm, but the setting of our dystopian situation is the organization that we're working in. The start of Animal Farm was a dream of a much better life for each of the participants in the farm, the animals in the farm. And in software development, the people who got together to actually pen the Agile software development methodology, the words, and actually publish them, they were frustrated. Maybe not frustrated is the right word, but they weren't happy with the status quo. They weren't happy with the way things were. And they thought they'd just write out this manifesto, these ideas, put them up, and just see what happens. And then they let people sign up to that. So there's a lot of signatures there, or people saying, I am whoever I am, and this is who I work for. And I agree with the principles or the values in the manifesto. In the story, we have the three young pigs that come onto the scene and take center stage after the original pig dies. And they implement the dream as they see it through the policy that they choose to use to implement it. And on the organizational side, we have many organizations productizing Agile, whether it's a champion within an organization or a consulting firm that says, hey, have we got a package for you? We'll help agilize everything with some obviously dollars attached. That sort of implementation, while it sounds great, might not work as well as some others. Not because I think all salespeople are disingenuous or anything. It's just that the why you do it is really important, and the productizing of it sort of diminishes some of that motivation. So I suppose that's what I'm trying to get to. I'm not maybe being very articulate. The windmill project is funny. I used to scratch my head when I would read about the windmill project, thinking, who could even think it was a good idea, to have a windmill, but the pigs build, what a funny idea. But is truth stranger than fiction? How strange are some of the things that we have to build into software and then we have to test, only to find out it really isn't used, which is sort of sad and it's a waste of effort and time, but it happens. I just think that's funny. The commandments and revisionism. How often is it that you've started off a project with grand ideals, grand pronouncements of how amazing this is going to be, wonderful SLAs that are going to be adhered to. And then if you're a performance engineer like me, you get to the pointy end of the project and suddenly all the documentation no longer says it's an SLA, but it's an aspirational goal. That's interesting. The last time I looked on the side of the wool shed or whatever it was, I thought it said something different, but it changed. So I've seen that happen a bunch of times. I'm a pragmatic person. I understand at the end of the day, we have to do what we have to do. So I'm not complaining about it bitterly, but I just think it's interesting. And the second last thing, Boxer. So Boxer is the cart horse in the Animal Farm story that works his guts out, really. He works really hard, and it's a pretty thankless job, and everyone sort of benefits from his work except him. And maybe I've got a psychological problem, but I think that testers are actually a bit like Boxer in the whole ecosystem of software development. We work very hard, and sometimes the hardest work we do results in a whole lot of green ticks. And sometimes people look at those green ticks with a sigh of relief and they think, thank goodness, we can go live, everything's fine. But it's as if you do all this work and there's nothing, no defects to show for it. And that's actually a good thing. But sometimes it's a bit of a thankless job. And when you do find some really important and severe problem, sometimes people sort of are a bit upset with you. It's a shoot the messenger type thing for finding the problem. So in the story, I sort of think about testers with that whole box mentality. So you might look at that story like me and smile. Then the final stage of the story is when there's the realization that the pigs that replace the people to manage the farm have become indistinguishable from the people. And I'm not meaning to be critical of management, but sometimes it's a bit hard to see, and it's a pretty tenuous link between the story. It's the weakest of all of them, but it's interesting to see how management is now substantially software entwined. So I think that's sort of an interesting sort of twist, but not a very strong one. So, of the authors of the original software development manifesto, Dave Thomas did a video a few years back, and he called it Agile is Dead. I think that's funny. He lamented in this video, and I'll put the link down below so you can watch the whole thing, because I think it's worth watching, that the values that they put together on that long weekend have been lost behind the implementation. So he was basically saying that Agile is not what you do, it's how you do it. And when you productize the whole Agile thing and you make it a noun instead of an adjective, you lose a lot of what it was intended to communicate and intended to be. You lose a lot of its power, effectively. So the values espoused by the pigs in Animal Farm were also lost during the implementation of those values. For some detail, because like I've been a bit sort of wafty in this, the 7th principle of the Agile Manifesto says that working software is the primary measure of success. And I get that, makes sense. But working software, what is working software? If working software is done software, if it's software that passes a whole lot of functional tests, well, that's great. But what happens if that functional test works, but under load it doesn't work? And I know that lots of CI/CD pipelines will incorporate some sort of performance testing or load testing, but it's not going to be a full system-wide test that pushes all the interfaces to the appropriate extremes that they might be exposed to in real life. So every time we say something is done without checking non-functional requirements, we're really injecting an amount of risk. I know that there's this concept of technical debt, which used to be talked about more often. Well, it's like a risk debt. Every time we say something's good or done or finished, and we haven't validated it under load, and we haven't checked that it's socially well behaved in the context of the broader system of other applications and interface usage, we're introducing this technical risk debt to the whole project. And I think that's important, and I think that's overlooked frequently. And I'm going to get back to that in a bit more detail. So from this tester's perspective, like I said, I know that software works when I've tested it under load in real world conditions. So the current problem and the possible dystopian future, if I want to give you a warning, cautionary tale, is that with each team being focused on its narrow band of functionality and not being responsible for the integration and validation of that integration at scale, we let some key things fall into some cracks. Many projects or many organizations that I've looked at have lost their core QA teams. Basically, their QA teams got sort of exploded out with all of the people being spread into the actual software development teams, and they would participate in the sprints and do the QA and help with test automation scripts and help push them into pipelines and things, and that's great. But that overall validation, especially under load of everything, is often missing. So when you have enough teams producing enough software, all in their own little sort of blinkered mindset, and then you have enough users using that software, and you're actually approaching the scalability limits, which many people seem to assume with cloud that there is no limit, but there is. And even if there's no limit in the cloud, effectively, your account might have a limit. So you'll eventually bump into your account limit, which I see every time I run a test almost. The entire organization's services start to become unstable, and failure modes that weren't really considered properly or weren't tested thoroughly need to work when things start to go unstable. And if they don't, you end up with a huge cascade of failures and all sorts of problems. For example, if you're expecting an interface to be live, but there's a problem, slow response, and you don't want that transaction to not work, it might go to a store and forward type approach, mode. And then when things are restored, it has to clear that backlog out. Well, when that backlog's clearing out, that might be a substantial backlog. Other transactions come in and are then queued up behind that backlog. And you have a lot of pressure on certain points in the app that were never there or are not normally there and are pretty hard to test for. So the other issue is in designing these broad load test type scenarios to validate the entire solution, you need to have a decent workload model. So how many Agile teams or representatives from those teams actually participate in workload profiling so that you can do a proper, decent test? So in summary, having a multitude of teams, each working on their own narrow area of interest, masks the combined risks of all of those separate systems. So when 100 different teams all say they're done at the end of a sprint, there's a chance that some combination of activity, those 100 different apps or the activity behind and the back end of those 100 apps will overwhelm something, and something unforeseen will happen. So in the Animal Farm story, the original farmers probably had a view of the entire farm. They didn't just think of the carrots or the potatoes or whatever it was as individual things, and the animals did. The animals didn't look at things as a system. They looked at things as components, and they tried to manage them as components. And I think Agile does that. That's what it's supposed to do, but it's not supposed to stand in the stead of a system-wide management view, which I think sometimes happens by mistake. That's the warning that I'm trying to articulate. Go back to the previous video I did, which talks about anti-fragile and stress testing. We want to be anti-fragile. We don't want to be fragile. And if we do something and we do something that could be done well, but we don't do it well, we're going to make our system very fragile, and that's bad. So the principles and values articulated in the Agile Software Development Manifesto are great, but they don't take the place of organizational quality assurance. So I like Agile. I do a lot of Agile things in the way I do my load and performance testing work, and I think that's great. But I'm seeing, and this is the point of the video, I'm seeing a slight backing off, maybe even a substantial backing off of system-wide testing because the assumption is that each of the teams has done all the testing that they need to do. And I think that's a potential problem. So hope you find this video useful, if nothing else, for a thought experiment. And the next time you watch a dystopian story, you might end up thinking of some correlations to your testing work or your software development work. Hope you have a great day and enjoy this and the other videos I've done. All the best. Bye.